Welcome to Pelly Health, where we encourage you to feel comfortable to talk about uncomfortable health issues relating to pelvic health and wellness. In this session, we'd like to talk about endometriosis. It's a condition in which tissues similar to the lining of the uterus grow outside of the uterus, causing severe pelvic pain. It's estimated that 1 in 10 women of reproductive age between puberty and menopause have endometriosis. It can have a significant impact on a person's life in a number of ways, including chronic pain, lack of energy, depression, sometimes with problems with intimate relationships, and in some cases, an inability to conceive. So today we're here with the amazing Rebekah Lloyd. She's the founder of This Independent Life. Rebekah is a women's health and careers advocate, speaker, and UN Women UK delegate. I know that today's topic is something that is very personal to Rebekah, not only the challenges with her own experience with endometriosis, but also how she's used this pain to find purpose with her work. Hi, Rebekah.
Hi, Helen. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really excited to be a part of this, so thank you.
We're really pleased to have you, and thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with those who are listening to this at Pelly Health. So can we just dive straight in, Rebekah, and start with your personal journey, your experience of being diagnosed and living with endometriosis? When did this all start for you? What was the sort of typical symptoms that you thought, maybe this isn't quite right?
To be honest, it was a pretty long journey, which isn't surprising, and is something that many who are listening to this will relate to, either through personal experience or through what they've heard about endometriosis. As of today, it takes on average 7 to 10 years for people to get diagnosed. It took me 10 years. So first for me was when I was at university, and I was having really painful periods, having a lot of symptoms in terms of bloating as well. But for me, it was a case that, I guess the turning point, I was studying biomedical science. So I was studying a scientific degree. My mum was also a nurse. So I sort of had a surrounding or a basic understanding of kind of, biology and what was happening, but I had never come across endometriosis. I'd never heard of it. And to be honest, I just always kind of thought it was normal to have painful periods. That was always what I'd been told. My health education at school was, basically non-existent. So I actually was getting medication from my housemate at university. And that was one of the first signs where I was like, okay, I probably need to actually go to a doctor about this, because I'd just been self-medicating up to that point with paracetamol, ibuprofen. But it started to get really bad where I felt like I couldn't get out of bed because the pain was so bad. And I think that for me was one of those sort of, okay, well, now I can't just go about my day to day, but everyone seems to think that it's normal. Went to the doctors, got my own prescription, but was never investigated, was never referred, was never really asked any questions. Again, like on reflection, I can sort of look at that in a very different way. But at the time, like I didn't know any better. If I had a healthcare professional telling me, everything's fine, just take these stronger painkillers, who was I to, question that? So for me, that was where it started. And then over the course of, the last 10 years, I kind of just learned to live with it. I was on a lot of different contraceptions, trying a lot of different things, partly for my skin, but also just because, again, just kind of been put on it and never really came off it, never had any like check-ins or anything, which again is very common. And it was only really sort of fast forward to around COVID time where I was working in a very demanding job, working in a startup, running the London office of a sort of global advertising agency, which was amazing in a lot of ways, but also with the added pressures of, being in that kind of environment, the pressures that we had with COVID, other thing, I just bought my first house, like a lot of things were happening. I basically burnt out. And again, it's sort of all layered, and it's always quite hard to even describe the journey because it is so like multifaceted. But I'd also been living in chronic pain every day for around 2 years at that point. So before it was kind of fluctuating a bit, but around that time, it had been probably 2 years of me being in pain every day, crying on the sofa, to the point where my partner was like, okay, enough is enough now. Like, we need to do something about this. And I was really fortunate that I had health insurance through my employer. So, long story short, was able to get a diagnosis, which as of today, still the only way you can do that is through surgery. So I had surgery, and that's where I got the diagnosis. And that was one of the treatments. But then a few months later, the symptoms came back. And now I'm here sort of a few years on, back in the NHS, on waiting lists for years, have tried various different things, but I've been told I've run out of options. So that was kind of what led me to starting what I'm doing now, which I'm happy to go into. But in terms of symptoms, it's very different for everyone. It's a very heterogeneous condition. it manifests very differently. Some people can have it and have no symptoms and will have their whole life not having any issues. There are others that, I know there's one woman who's speaking at my conference in a few weeks' time who's had 16 surgeries. She has a urostomy bag and a colostomy bag. And, so it's so varied. And actually, that's why I think it's so important to hear from different people's experiences and understand how it can manifest, because it can be pain, it can be bloating, it can also be all around our body. There's not much research that's been done on endometriosis, so we don't really know what causes it. We don't understand how it works at a biological level. However, we do know that it's been found, in the lungs, in the bowel, it can be found all over our bodies. So there's definitely a lot more to be done. But I think in terms of symptoms, it's really important to recognize that if it's something that might seem a little bit weird, or you may not think it's related, don't disregard it, because it's really important to make sure that you're collecting all of that information and taking that to your healthcare professional to sort of almost help them connect the dots, because it can be really hard to get a diagnosis in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the story globally. It's so difficult to pinpoint and to get that accurate diagnosis, hence it's taking so long. And it's good to see that now we're hearing more and more about it in the mainstream media, that these endometriosis is much more on the agenda because of the prevalence of it and how many women are suffering and living with it, enduring it, as you've had to do. I mean, that takes, you alluded to, being at university and working, etc. I mean, it must take a huge impact and toll on your day-to-day life of just getting up and doing the normal things, especially let alone, a high-powered career or trying to do various things in your life. That's having that impact of living in chronic pain must take its toll emotionally.
Yeah, it does. Living in pain all the time is not easy. There's no other way of saying it or putting it. I think the reality is it is what it is. And, I'm human like everyone else. Like, there are days like today where I can, you just kind of get on with it. And I think because, with endometriosis and a lot of other women's health conditions, because we've become it's almost like we've internalized it, become so used to kind of getting on with it, that we've become really good at coping and finding ways to just make it work, which on the one hand is great because it means I'm able to get about and do what I want to be doing. On the other hand, it means that, it took me so long to get to this point. And actually now I still catch myself feeling like, actually, no, today is a day where I just need to rest, because I can feel that my body, I can feel like I'm getting a really bad flare up. I can feel that, the constant pain that I have like around my right ovary, which is where I have an endometrioma, is there, but it can also expand and kind of move and grow, for want of a better way of explaining it. So yeah, it's really tough. And I think that's something I'm really, really passionate about, talking about the psychological impact of endometriosis and women's health conditions, because as of today, it's not actually recommended in national guidelines, in the UK at least, to be provided with psychological support whilst having endometriosis, which I think is frankly crazy, because actually when you're living with any chronic condition, not just endometriosis, but you're living with any type of chronic pain or chronic symptoms or something that is impacting your ability to go about your day-to-day life in the way that you would if you didn't have that condition, to not have any support for the impact of that, like you said, to me, I just don't understand it. And I think that's something that I'm really looking to kind of provide that support. Like, I host workshops and bring in different experts to kind of do that and make sure that there are options for women, because at the moment it's so difficult to have someone that really understands the nuance, because it is different. It's a very different condition to a lot of other conditions, and it's not to say that it's any worse or any better, but the reality is it comes, it's nuance. There is nuance in having it, and I think it's really important that we're able to provide more places where people can go for support. But as of today, there's not really anyone specializing. There's a few people that I'm connected with, but honestly, I've asked so many people like in the space, do you know anyone who kind of can help from a psychological standpoint? And it's really something that just needs a lot more work.
Yeah, I mean, you've obviously been struggling it for many years, and as you say, you're now working in that space and helping support other women. What kind of advice would you give? Let's say there's somebody who's new to endometriosis and has been diagnosed, which we know can take an awful long time. But then what? Where do you go from there? As you say, it's not just seeing your GP, your doctor, or having the surgery. It's then what? What's the other support? What would your advice be
Yeah, so I think, to be honest, wherever you're at with your journey, I think it's really important. There's a few things, there's a few tips, and like this is, part of what I do when I go into corporates and, host my events, is trying to provide that guidance and that ability to navigate the system, because we just aren't really taught it otherwise, and we don't really know how to kind of navigate it. But for me, I think tracking your symptoms is really important. And so, for some people, they'll have a diagnosis through surgery, they'll have treatment, and that'll be it. And they'll be symptom free, pain free, and that's amazing. And obviously that's the goal. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people, myself included, where that's not the case. So I think it's really important to track your symptoms to make sure that you have evidence of what that is. Unfortunately, there is still quite a lot of dismissal and, gaslighting and challenges. That I'm not saying everyone, but the reality is that is the case, and that is the experience of a lot of people. So I always say, if you can have hard evidence and you can have, real kind of data, right, like to back up what you're saying in those conversations, that can be really helpful. Always having like questions and making sure that you're taking notes in your appointments. So always try and ask for follow-up appointments, even if you've had treatments and even if you're fine right now. Again, depending on where you're at, I think it's always good to just get those appointments in for checkups, for scans, for things that are available. Because if you have something like an endometrioma, which is a blood cyst, you can see that on a scan. Again, there's not the best diagnostics at the moment, and that's another whole conversation in terms of actually at the moment there's some great innovations happening, looking at blood and menstrual blood and different ways to diagnose. But as of today, it's quite limited in terms of the scans that are available. But making sure that you're being proactive with those things, just so that you're catching it if it is something that is happening and you're able to get ahead of it. I'm a big advocate for prevention all the way. Like the more you can kind of get on top of this stuff earlier, the better, so that you can prevent it growing and sort of stick, it's like sticky tissue. It basically sticks your organs together. So you want to try and catch that as soon as possible. And then if you do need to have further surgery, you can, but at least you have that, knowledge is power, right? Like you have that information.
Absolutely.
Checking as well for cancellations. Again, this depends on what country you're in, but it can be hard with waiting lists. So it's really important to know that sometimes, there's not as much admin and resource available to kind of plug the gaps if someone does cancel. So sometimes if you call, you can get appointments. Asking for a copy of your medical records as well. It sounds pretty dry, but actually, again, you never know how things are going to be sent between, how different centers that you're going between, don't talk to each other all the time. Often they don't talk to each other at all. So having a copy of your medical records, which you're now able to have.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice.
Yeah, I know. It was something that I was like, you couldn't actually do it until recently, at least in the UK, because it was protected. But now they've made it so that anyone can have access, which I think is amazing because, for me, it's all about encouraging shared decision-making as well. Like in all of this, you have to recognize that the healthcare professionals are humans too, right? Like they have their own pressures and stresses that they're trying to navigate. They also don't have a system that maybe necessarily is set up to allow them to succeed and help people as best they can. So for me, it's about finding ways to help them to help you, if you know what I mean. But yeah, I think those are some of the kind of, I guess, aspects to, if you're on the earlier stage. But on the later stage, some practical tips. One of the biggest things for me, honestly, was finding a community. Or actually, I guess in my case, I couldn't really find a community, so I created a community. But either way, actually being able to connect with people that really understand and get you, like on a human level. I think as humans, whatever the experiences that we've had, we have a real need. And this is with my like biomedical science, like fascination of the human body hat on. But there's a real, fascinating history in terms of like cultural evolution and how we actually connect and feel seen, and storytelling, and being able to just know that someone has been through a similar experience. And you can have the most supportive partner, friends, family in the world, but sometimes you really just need to feel like you're in that space with people that really understand you. So for me, honestly, like that was Absolutely. One of the biggest life-changing moments. And I honestly don't think I would be here today if I didn't have the people that I'd met along the way to actually support me and to answer questions and to be there when it's really hard and to encourage me when I'm having a hard day or if I've had an appointment that's not gone well. Like just knowing that you have people there and knowing that you have real, genuine support, honestly, has been transformational. But yeah, I could go on and on, honestly, in terms of like different things.
No, but I think that's so a crucial. Yeah. It's such a crucial part of it, as you said, the psychological element of it, the support, knowing that you're not isolated, you're not on your own. There are others who are going through that with you, albeit varying degrees and different circumstances. But, it is actually a lot more common than people would expect. And so finding that group that you can relate to or share knowledge with or experience, and some of the great tips that you've just given us to how to follow up and take ownership sometimes of your own healthcare, because We can't just rely on the systems that are there to support us, as it were. And I think, and part of that support system, let's move on to your work. I mean, you've been doing some phenomenal things in the areas of supporting those with endometriosis. But let's start with, you founded This Independent Life. Tell us a little bit about what that's about and what has inspired you to set that up in the first place.
Yeah, so firstly, thank you. That means a lot to hear from you because, it's definitely been a journey. But yeah, for me, it really all started with, as I was saying, I think, having this experience of working in healthcare. I've worked across healthcare my whole career. I've studied biomedical science at university, worked in research, worked in the NHS, worked in pharmaceuticals, worked in, medical diagnostic. Like, I had sort of seen it from a lot of different angles, as well as having family members. And then through my own lived experience, it was really, I just kind of went down the rabbit hole, to be honest, of how is it that in 2021, we still have such a lack of understanding and options for people who are experiencing endometriosis and other women's health conditions? And I just kind of became obsessed with it. Like, I think, to be honest, like, I just couldn't understand how, having worked in, diabetes, dermatology, like all of these other disease areas where there's a huge amount of, funding and research and innovation and just amazing things happening, that there just wasn't the same in women's health, when actually arguably, it's over 50% of the population. A lot of these conditions have a huge, huge impact in terms of quality of life and, all of the reasons which I won't need to explain to anyone listening to this. But I just couldn't believe that there wasn't really anyone out there that was kind of, looking at that, but actually overlaying that with the impact that it can have in terms of our careers. And then also what that means in terms of our financial well-being and our financial situation. Because I think historically we have sort of looked at those things as separate, right? We've got our professional life and our personal life, or, we don't talk about money, or, women not being included in clinical trials and women not having bank accounts until the 70s. Like, there's all this kind of historical generational stuff that we've kind of got almost as a hangover of, the generations. And this isn't to kind of go really like, screw the patriarchy and all of that. But that's just the reality, is that for a lot of time, we haven't had that ability to have autonomy over our lives and be able to have we haven't been prioritized. And so I think for me, it was really actually about finding a way to kind of bridge that gap. And I couldn't find anyone doing it. And that was honestly where it started, because that for me was something where I was like, okay, well, I'm really ambitious. Like, I love work. I love my job. I love being able to, do something that I'm passionate about. And I kind of lost that through what I was doing. And it was almost like, it's one of those things where I don't like that I have endometriosis, but if I had never had this experience happen to me, I would never be where I am now. And so I always think it's kind of, I don't know, it's a double-edged sword, right? But I think for me, it's really about how I have taken that experience, and it really did kind of pivot me into identifying actually what is my purpose and what do I find fulfilling, and how can I be creative, and what are the things that I was missing in my life and my career, and how can I create something that I feel fulfilled in, but also that I can actually do something to change this, because there is such an unmet need, there is such a demand, there is so much that can be done, there is so much potential as well. Like, yes, it can be a little bit doom and gloom, and it can be very negative, and there's a lot of anger and frustration, and I get that, and I think it's important to have the ability to voice that and have places where you can share. But on the other hand, like, if we're just talking about the issues all the time and not talking about what we're going to do about it, nothing is going to change, right? So that's where, for me, I really saw an opportunity to help women and to help people that were, experiencing either navigating, trying to get a diagnosis, navigating treatment options, like me, trying different things, trial and error, just trying to learn, like, what are the things that can help me, from nutrition to pelvic floor therapy. Like, I'd never even heard of pelvic floor physio or therapy. So I think for me, it was really about helping people to understand and navigate that journey, but also appreciate what that means in terms of your career. And actually, for a lot of people, if you're struggling with a women's health condition, you can't get about your career and do all of the things that you want to be doing because you're having hospital appointments, you're in pain all the time, you've got other symptoms. So for me, it's not about necessarily, and this is a whole other conversation in itself, but it's not about saying, okay, let's give people loads of time off and, make adjustments. For me, it's no, let's get to the root of the problem. Let's actually stop women from being in pain. Let's stop normalizing pain and suffering for women. And let's actually look at ways to solve these problems and to create real solutions and to create sustainable change, so that in future, for when, if I am ever fortunate to have children, that we're not having the same conversation in however many years' time. And so really trying to educate people on that as well. And also, to be honest, a lot of people now come to me because they've had a women's health experience and they're wanting to get into the women's health space, kind of like me. I think,
right.
if you have this kind of experience, it really, and this is, again, with anything, you have a profound experience in your life and it makes you question everything. And I think for me, again, there was no one really offering that support. So really trying to help people who are navigating that career change and that pivot and just understanding the industry, understanding the space, understanding what options there are, but really understanding that also a lot of this stuff costs money. And so for me, it was those kind of three areas of our health, our work and our money, almost in like a triad, and how, us in the middle, whatever it is that we want to be doing and achieving, we should be able to have the balance and equity of all of those three things. And then by doing the things that I do, which is working with corporates and workplaces, hosting events, having a podcast and doing advisory and consulting with women's health research and startups, those are kind of the ways that I'm working to kind of move things forward. And then obviously, as you mentioned, doing things in Parliament and with government in the UK. I mean, there's so much to be done. But for me, I think it was really about trying to take my experience and do something about it.
And I think, you hit the nail on the head, and it's about autonomy, right? Finding that autonomy again and taking control. And as you said, we know what the issues are. We've just now got to start to address them and find ways to address them and to give, and as you said, it's not necessarily like a patriarchy sort of issue. It's just we want a level playing field so that everybody can contribute. And I think that's the end of the day. That's the mission that we're all trying to solve within the space of women's health. So let's not make our health a barrier to the other things in life that we should be doing as well. And so it's phenomenal what you've done. And I think you are very much a pioneer in the work that you're doing. And I'm not surprised that more women are coming to you and saying, how do I get into women's health? Because it is a really fascinating area to work in. But also, more than that, there's so much to be done because there's been such neglect for so many decades. So I think, there's a lot of work to be done. It's an exciting place to work in, but it's also a really meaningful one as well. And so let's talk about the other thing that you've been doing, like you've got lots of free time. You initiated last year the inaugural Future of Endometriosis Conference, which is the first of its type, I believe, in the UK, which coincides obviously with Endometriosis Awareness Week. So we know about your motivation from having going through endometriosis yourself. What are some of the outcomes? Maybe something that might have surprised you, I don't know, of your first inaugural event last year, because I know this year is your second time and hopefully now an annual event established. What are some of the things, the themes or things that people may have told you that emerged from the event that may have taken you a little bit by surprise, or thinking, get women in a room, let's talk about endometriosis. But I think with these events, there's often that personal moment where you think, wow, that was phenomenal, or women are talking about X. Or what was something from the event for you?
Yeah, I actually just got goosebumps. I feel like every time I think about it, I get it's overwhelming, because it's honestly to this day, I think is probably one of the best days of my life. I think it was really something. I mean, it was an extension of everything that I talked about, like you said. And for me, I was just looking to attend an event, a conference, a kind of bigger event where I could go and learn from what's the research happening? What are the startups, the innovations, the charities, just what's happening, and how can I get involved, or how can I, just get into that world and just try and, learn more. And I just couldn't find it. So that's kind of how it started. I just couldn't find it. So I created it. And for me, I think one of the biggest, to be honest, I don't know, it's hard because in some ways I was surprised, but on the other hand, I kind of wasn't surprised at how amazing it was, because of all the things we've just talked on, because there is such a need and there is so much passion in this space. Being in a room with people that are just totally on a level with you in a way that I'd never experienced before, and to know that other people felt that as well, I think for me was one of the biggest kind of impacts and one of the biggest positive outcomes, because I think I was kind of thinking, okay, I'm putting this together. It might be no one's going to come. It's going to be a total flop. You never know. It's the first time I was doing it. It never really been done before. And maybe there's a reason why it's never been done before, right? And I think the feedback from the event was just, it was just overwhelming. And it really just actually, to be honest, reignited or boosted the fire that was already in me, because I felt actually this isn't just something that I want and need. Like, this is clearly proving that there is a want and need for these types of spaces and for this type of, you know, curation of information and education and hope, you know, like, and actually being able to know that people have come away from that. You know, some people had never even spoken to their partners, their family, their friends about it before, and they were coming to this room on their own to connect with people for the first time in their life. I mean, just knowing that that was something that they were able to then take back into their life, or, you know, I had people, you know, people brought their partners, their mums, their children, like, you know, it was just something that I could never honestly have dreamed of, you know, that kind of ripple effect that could have happened. And knowing that every person in that room, whatever they were to do, they would have taken something that they can then either activate in their own life, or they can go to their workplace, or they can go to their friend who's, you know, they know has been cancelling plans a lot lately. And maybe, you know, it's like all those little things that really cumulatively add up. Exactly. And I think for me as well, one of the other big positive outcomes was, I think there's a big issue in terms of silos in the space. And I think there's a lot of incredible people doing amazing things, amazing organizations. But because of, you know, the lack of funding in women's health and the lack of an understanding of what causes something like endometriosis, you know, I always say, if you don't understand the problem, how can you create solutions? And so I think because of that, there hasn't really been opportunities like this really for the community to come together, also on a professional level, and to actually have those opportunities to collaborate and connect. And, you know, as another result of the conference, I know there's people that are now collaborating. You know, there was a researcher from Oxford who did an amazing talk, collaborating now with one of the other founders of a women's health startup. So it's also for me about really trying to connect people and organizations in the space, because to me, like, the more of that we can have, and the more collective collaboration we can have, the faster we can move everything forward, and the better we can actually create solutions that are patient-centered and are truly patient-centered in, you know, having that voice, having that perspective and opinion at the heart of what we're doing and what we're trying to achieve, really, and then collectively trying to do that together. And so for me, I think that again was a really amazing outcome, because I didn't go into it thinking, okay, everyone, you know, people are going to get jobs out of this, and people are going to, you know, get other collaborations and business opportunities. But that is what happened. And, you know, through supporting, you know, research projects came out of it. You know, there were so many things that came out of it that were like an added bonus, which just I couldn't not do it again. So even though I need a holiday at this moment,
we're pleased you did. We're pleased you did.
And yeah, I can't say.
And now in its second year, and I'm sure it will go on for many more years as well. It's a phenomenal event. So one of your other many strings, you're also UN Women's UK delegate. And as you alluded to, you were invited recently to give evidence at the UK Parliament for Women in Equalities Committee, on top of the work that you're doing with this Independent Life and the Endometriosis Summit. So these are all kind of huge achievements, even just one of them. If you pick one of them, is a pretty big achievement. Earlier you spoke, and I know you've spoken openly about your previous or personal experience with burnout, and you've been very open on that topic. So with all these things that you're juggling and taking on, which is phenomenal in the space, what do you do now to be more proactive or more aware to ensure that you don't find yourself in a situation where you're having that burnout and a flare up of your endometriosis, and, you know, just everything becoming a little bit overwhelming? What do you do to prevent that?
It's a very good question. So there's a few things that I do. And again, look, like, I'm not perfect. I've definitely not cracked it. And I'm very aware that I could probably be doing a lot better. But, you know, we all have to start from somewhere, right? So yeah, I think for me, some of the biggest things that I kind of proactively do, and I am a lot more mindful, because I don't want to be back in that place where I, you know, was having burnout and I'd had a breakdown. You know, I'd never want to be in that position again. So I think for me, I really have tried to take a different approach in terms of, to be honest, like how I live my life generally. Like I really, you know, had to look and take a step back and just evaluate, okay, like what actually brings me joy? Who are the people that I'm surrounding myself with? Like, what are the things that I'm doing with my time? Like, we've all got the same 24 hours in a day. What is it that I'm actually doing, and how am I creating time for rest and relaxation? But also really, for me, it's been about learning to self-reflect, I think, a lot more. I think before I was just very like, go, 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 mask on, everything's fine, let's just pretend everything's perfect. Whereas now I'm a lot more like, look, I'm not perfect. And actually, I think the more we can learn to be open about that, and, you know, we are all human, we're not robots, nobody's perfect. So
Absolutely.
I think for me, yeah, it's about kind of proactively trying to check in. I don't work on the weekends. So very practically, I don't work weekends unless I have something like, you know, like the conference is on a Saturday. That's intentional because a lot of people who aren't in the startup world or, you know, the research world have 9-to-5 jobs. So actually I'm trying to make sure that it's as accessible and inclusive as possible. But with the exception of that, which is once a year, I don't work weekends, and I really try to switch off. I try to, you know, I have digital detoxes now when I go on holiday, and I try to do that on the weekend as well. I'll actually delete like Instagram, LinkedIn, my emails. I really need to actively, and that's been through trial and error, to be honest, because before I'd be like, oh, it's fine, I won't check it. And then it's like, I know it's there, so I'll just check it. But so now I delete
and you always do, everyone always does, yeah.
I read that.
Good.
Exactly. So for me, it's about not working on weekends and making time for things that bring me joy. Like I love traveling, like so much. And that was something that I just wasn't making time for. So, you know, doing that, finding, you know, I love live music. I love dancing, like whatever that might be. I love going out for dinner. I love food. I love wine. Like I did my level 2 wine course, you know, like whatever it is, prioritizing and making time for those things. So it's not, because, you know, having your own business is all consuming, like it really is. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that you have to try a little bit harder in terms of personal boundaries. And I have to take my own advice for the, you know, the sessions that I do for corporates around personal boundaries and preventing burnout. And for me, you know, it's about calendar blocking, making sure that I'm stopping at a certain time, making sure that I'm allocating and planning, and I don't have a to-do list anymore. I use calendar blocking as that, and finding what works for you. But for me, I think it's about, yeah, trying to just make sure that I'm being more mindful of my time, allocating time for things appropriately, and being open to learning new ways of doing things. And also, I actually also have a quote on my fridge, which I will read because for me, it's a big one, which is, don't judge each day by the harvest you reap, but by the seeds that you plant. And for me, that's been on my fridge now for almost a year and a half. And I think it's just a good reminder as well of like, look, you're not, some days people aren't going to reply to you. You're going to feel like you're talking to a brick wall, or you just want to give up. But actually, it's okay to just take the pressure off and know that you've done a good job. So, yeah.
Well, I think that's refreshing. And I think more people should be more open about it, because I think everyone, you know, many of us can look at others and think they've got it all together and everything's perfect. But in actual fact, you do need to look after yourself, because we all know you can't pour from an empty cup. So it's refreshing to hear you say that. And I think because of all the work that you do in this space, Rebekah, I mean, it's phenomenal what you've achieved already just in the last few years. I'd like to see what you're going to be doing in the future as well. But what would you like to see, or what would be your aspiration for the future of endometriosis?
My aspiration for the future of endometriosis and all women's health, frankly, are actually the 3 themes of my conference, which are interest, investment, and innovation. So for me, like those are kind of the 3 big pillars that I feel like we really need to kind of nail. And the way I'm kind of approaching it, and what I would like to see, is what I do with everything, which is, I call it my AKA framework, which is awareness, knowledge, and action. But in all of these things, we really need to have a better understanding of what endometriosis is. Like at the very core, we need to have more interest and awareness of that, in terms of whether that's, you know, a national education campaign or having a deeper understanding in terms of research. Like across the board, we need to have more interest in endometriosis in the first place, because if we don't get that, then we can't move things forward, and we won't, you know, be able to actually be connecting with those women to actually get the support that they need. We need more investment, because at the moment, only 1% of funding goes towards women's health research. In terms of like, and that's just in the research world. In the startup world, it's also like a whole other story. And just across the board, there's just not the resources there to fund what is really, really needed. So we need genuine large-scale investment to do proper research, proper trials, large-scale studies, long-term studies. I mean, the list goes on, but we also need to have funding to support innovations. It costs a lot of money to create some of these things, because we're talking about our health. We're talking about an area where it's not just putting out, you know, something which isn't going to be put into our body, you know, like I think we really need to appreciate, and there needs to be an understanding of the amount of investment that is needed, because we haven't had this kind of years of the research. We really are starting a lot further behind than a lot of other areas in healthcare. So I think we really need to kind of take that seriously and look at that again from a government level, but also looking at private funding. And we just need better and more innovation. We need to not be using, and again, there are some amazing
100%.
things happening in the space, but as of today, most people, if you go and get a smear test, like you're still using a device that was invented like during World War II. And I just think that's just not good enough. It's not good enough. And we shouldn't have people having surgery for diagnosis. We shouldn't have people waiting for decades to be heard and to get the support that they need. And there's so much need. And I think if we can truly look at how we can innovate and do things differently and look at how we're doing business as well. Like I'm such a big believer in using business as a force for good and finding ways to do things differently. You know, if it's broken and it's not working, like let's look at different ways of doing it. You know, I think there's so much opportunity, and I'm so excited for the people that are coming up and, you know, the students that reach out to me saying they're trying to get their funding for their PhD on this amazing piece of research. And there's so much there. And I just think if we can have more interest, investment and innovation, I genuinely believe that we will have a future where we see positive change and we will understand endometriosis and we'll know how to prevent it. And at least, you know, until we can do that, we'll know how to properly treat it so that women can just get back to living their lives. So, yeah, I think for me, those are the three big ones if I had to choose.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Rebekah. I mean, the work that you do is incredible. And you and many other voices in this space for endometriosis, just keep doing what you're doing, because I do believe that the tide is very, very slowly turning, hopefully. And I just think this is one of the very, very important subjects that affects so many people. And so thank you very much for being with us today and for sharing your story. Appreciate it.
No, thank you so much. And thank you for creating a platform for these conversations. Honestly, I think it's so important just to have the conversation. So I'm really, really grateful. And yeah, if there's anyone, my virtual door, my physical door is always open. So if there's anyone that has any questions or needs to chat or like, please know, like I'm here to help and support genuinely however I can. So yeah, just thank you so much. And yeah, I'm excited to see what you guys do as well, because I think we need more people like you as well. We need more people creating these spaces and these solutions and looking at ways of doing things. So thank you for everything that you do as well.
Thank you.